Hey guys, tonight we wander back, way back, into the cradle of civilization. You're trudging across the dust caked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers coil through mud brick cities like lazy serpents. The heat is dry, the goats are loud, and the streets of Uruk hum with chatter, sandal slaps, and the soft squish of something you probably didn't want to step in. You're standing in the middle of one of the earliest marketplaces in human history, eyeing heaps of barley, baskets of dates, and a man very adamantly insisting that his sheep is top tier wool, guaranteed. You're about to buy something, but wait, no paper, no pens, no Excel spreadsheets, and no way to prove that yes, you actually did pay for that jug of beer yesterday, and that you're not just some smooth talking barley thief. Welcome to the wild, receiptless West of 4000 BCE. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where are you watching from and what time is it where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the crowd, eyes drawn to a stone platform stacked high with baskets, scrolls, and clay. A man with ink stained fingers, although there's no ink, just dye from some unlucky berries, mutters under his breath, pressing a pointed reed into a damp square of clay. You watch as lines appear, symbols stack, and something, some kind of proto list, comes to life. This is not your local cashier printing a receipt. This is far older and messier and weirdly satisfying. The year is somewhere around 3100 BCE, give or take a few decades, depending on which archaeologist is arguing at the moment. You're in Uruk, one of the world's first real cities, and everyone's a little obsessed with two things: trade and not getting swindled. Without receipts, everything's about memory. And let's be honest, your memory is not great. Neither is anyone else's. So, a growing class of clever scribes begins to emerge, professional clay pressers who record what was traded, when, by whom, and sometimes whether the sheep in question had all its teeth. Your friend Hamu, a brewer who swears his beer doesn't taste like river water, it does, explains the deal. Every transaction must be logged by one of these scribes. Why? Because last week a shipment of figs went missing en route to the temple. And now there's a priest walking around muttering curses and threatening to summon a storm god. You wander over to the edge of the temple market, where a small boy is vigorously stamping a cube of clay with what looks like a cow's behind. He squints, then flips the tablet over and tries again. He's learning. Scribes in training spend years mastering hundreds of symbols, each one a tiny, crooked icon that represents not just an object, but sometimes whole ideas. Bali has its own sign. So does beer, and sheep, and priests. There's even one for debt. That one gets used a lot. Mainstream historians agree the scribe class, young men mostly, formed the core of Mesopotamian bureaucracy. They didn't just write, they enforced accountability, controlled temple resources, and basically made sure someone didn't walk off with a sacrificial goat and say, "What goat?" But fringe historians also like to argue that this system wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Clay tablets weren't just tools, they were imbued with the power of the written word, which the Mesopotamians saw as divine. Some scholars even suggest receipts were blessed before being fired in kilns, just in case you needed the gods as witnesses in a business dispute. So, Yes, your ancient receipt might come with a side of divine judgment. You pass a stall selling dried fish, and the vendor waves a tablet at a customer like it's a threat. Turns out the guy had underpaid last week. The vendor points to a wedge shaped mark. See? He grunts. 1 silver, not half. The customer groans. No getting out of that one. Here's where it gets quirkier. Some receipts don't just list numbers, they have little notes like sheep looked sick or barley, possibly watered down. The Mesopotamians were detail oriented and petty. In one fragment recovered from Nippo, a merchant accuses another of lying about goat count. The accused responds in cuneiform. Essentially, I counted them twice. You're bad at math. Historians still argue whether these early receipts functioned as legal documents or more as strong suggestions backed by social shame. But one thing's clear: by turning squishy mud into official records, Mesopotamians created the first permanent proof of purchase. Suddenly, memory didn't matter, clay didn't forget. And you? You're starting to realize that even in a world of ziggurats and sun gods, people really don't want to be cheated. As the sun sinks low over the city's walls, the temple bell sounds, a deep, throaty clang that echoes through the alleys. Market stalls begin closing. The scribe with the berry stained fingers carefully stacks his tablets and covers them with a cloth. Tomorrow, he'll fire them in a kiln, making the records permanent. Or if he's lazy, he'll just leave them to dry in the sun and pray it doesn't rain. You walk away from the market with a half full satchel, a receipt made of clay, and a strange sense of comfort. Not because the system is perfect, it's definitely not, but because it exists. People have figured out how to remember, how to track, how to prove that you are here doing business long before anyone could text you the invoice. You glance back one last time at the scribe's table. The boy is still stamping cows, and his teacher nods approvingly. One day, that kid will write a receipt for a shipment of onions that somehow survives 5,000 years in a museum drawer. And someone, maybe even you, will read it. You're back on the streets of Uruk, the city now glowing a molten orange beneath the late afternoon sun. The crowds thin as people head home, clutching their purchases, woven baskets, goat milk, maybe a few smuggled figs. But you're curious. Your clay receipt is still soft in your hand, and that strange rectangular tablet, speckled with symbols and pressed by someone else's hand, feels heavier than it should, not in weight, in meaning. A man approaches you, robes dusted with flour, eyes ringed with exhaustion. New to the system, he asks. You nod. He gestures to your receipt. Good. That means you're less likely to be robbed tonight. And just like that, you learn the hard truth. These weren't just passive records. Receipts were protective spells in bureaucratic form. Now you follow him, because apparently you do that now, and wind through a narrow alley that opens into something unexpected, a public archive. It's not much to look at, just a large room filled with low shelves stacked with hardened clay tablets, rows and rows of them. Some cracked, some crumbling, some still wrapped in bundles of twine. A low fire burns in one corner where a pot-bellied man carefully turns a tablet with tongs, checking if it's baked all the way through. Welcome to the memory vault, the flour-dusted man says. We write it down so we can forget. You arch a brow. He chuckles. That's the point, isn't it? To forget the transaction, but still prove it happened. The archivist isn't a priest or even a scribe. He's a custodian of records, a man who spends his days alphabetizing Well, pre alphabetizing by location, by temple, by type of good. There's a shelf for barley, one for livestock, one just for things someone borrowed and definitely didn't return. See this one? He says, handing you a block that looks like it came from a cookie mold. A woman rented 3 donkeys, never brought them back. It's been 5 years. You squint at the markings, but unless you're fluent in Sumerian cuneiform, it's gibberish. Still, you believe him. The tone of the wedge marks feels accusatory. Mainstream scholars believe these archive rooms, usually tucked inside temples or administrative centers, were the first real file cabinets. They held tax records, temple donations, work assignments, and yes, receipts. But the fringe theory that these weren't just archives, they were proto databases for a highly controlled economic system. Some even claim the temple system was the economy, with all trade filtered through sacred bureaucracy. You wouldn't call it capitalism, more like God ordained socialism with a paperwork addiction. As you finger through the tablets, you notice some are enclosed in little clay envelopes, like actual envelopes, with more writing on the outside. It's receipt inception. You ask your guide why. Seals, he explains. If you break the outer shell, you've tampered with the proof. The inside stays untouched. That's your backup. Historians still argue whether these sealed tablets were used more for business or legal protection. Some think they were contracts. Others say they were just glorified IOUs for priests. Either way, the practice shows one thing clearly. Trust, even 5,000 years ago, was not enough. You needed clay. And then he shows you his favorite, a tiny, palm sized tablet. This one, he whispers, is a love loan. You blink. A what? A man lent a necklace to a woman. She promised to return it after the festival. It's been 10 years. The tablet's still here. He must have hoped she'd come back. You're quiet now, staring at the rows and rows of little tragedies, little victories, locked in wedges and lines. Some of these tablets outlived empires, outlived gods, outlived memory. Suddenly, you think of your own receipts. Digital, deleted, forgotten. But this is a forever kind of proof. Back in the street, the flour dusted man returns to his bakery, disappearing into the golden haze. You sit near a wall, still holding your soft, squishy clay rectangle. It's drying now, hardening into something permanent. Something someone might dig up in 5,000 years and whisper, so this guy bought beer? A kid walks by dragging a toy cart. Yes, toy carts existed. While his dad argues with a fishmonger over the weight of that trout. And sure enough, a scribe nearby jots something down in a lump of wet clay. You watch the same rhythm again. Press, mark, smooth, seal. Now you're starting to notice the system. The way commerce here isn't just about trust or honor, it's about trackability. Every temple donation, every beer jug, every borrowed donkey, pressed, baked, saved. And the really wild part, it works. The city hums because of it. You see, receipts didn't emerge from technology, they emerged from necessity. Trade exploded, populations grew, memory cracked under the weight of too many I owe us. So the Mesopotamians looked down, saw mud, and thought, let's write in this. And now, 5,000 years later, your local grocery store hands you a flimsy slip of thermal paper that fades in a week. You kind of miss the clay. No fun. You're still thinking about that love loan tablet when the sun dips below the reed thatched rooftops. The heat lingers like a second skin, and the smell of roasted barley wafts from a nearby stall. But now you're on a different path, literally and mentally. The flower dusted archivist planted a seed in your head. Who came up with this clay receipt thing in the first place? You pass a temple plaza, quiet now except for a few loitering goats. At its edge sits an older man, skin like weathered leather, fiddling with a bit of string. He watches you with that look elders get, somewhere between amusement and suspicion. You hold up your clay tablet. He nods like he's seen this act before. Then he pats the empty space beside him. You want to know where it started, don't you? He croaks, more statement than question. You nod again. He points past the city walls. Go back, before Uruk, before clay got clever, to when people counted not by symbols, but by things. And just like that, you're on a mental ox cart ride, bouncing through time, further back, past organized cities, past scribed receipts, to when numbers were more touchable. Picture this: it's 8000 BCE, and you're a goat herder, not a metaphorical one, an actual, smelly, sleep deprived, constantly counting the goats so you don't get cursed by your uncle kind of herder. You've traded 5 goats for some grain, and now you need a way to remember it. But you don't write, you don't read. Writing hasn't even been invented yet. So what do? You grab 5 small pebbles, each one representing a goat. You put them in a pouch, seal it with a blob of clay, and give it to the grain merchant. If anyone asks, both of you can open the pouch and count the pebbles. Deal verified. Mainstream historians call these tokens. They came in all shapes and sizes: cones for grain, spheres for sheep, cylinders for bread. It was like playing with a bag of ancient Monopoly pieces. Each one stood for a real thing in the real world. Now, here's where it gets delightfully weird. Some fringe scholars believe the token system didn't just evolve into receipts, they think it laid the foundation for all writing, like the entire concept of symbolic thought. They argue that once we assigned meaning to an object, a lump of clay, shaped like a cow, it wasn't a big leap to start scratching that idea into a surface instead. And sure enough, over time, the Mesopotamians started pressing those tokens into flat bits of clay before sealing them. Eventually, they stopped using the 3D tokens entirely. Why carry a bag of pebbles when a flat record does the job? You laugh softly. They were inventing spreadsheets without even knowing it. But not everyone agrees. Historians still argue whether the token to writing theory holds water. Some claim writing developed independently for religious reasons or political control, not accounting. Others think tokens and writing overlapped for centuries, serving different masters. Still, the facts are irresistible. We know that thousands of these clay envelopes with tokens inside, called bullae, have been found across Mesopotamia. Some even have the impressions of the tokens pressed into their outer shells, like a cheat sheet in case you couldn't open them. That's like taping your bank balance to your safe. Not the most secure plan, but hey, it worked. And that brings us to your next mental time jump. Now you're in the marshy villages of ancient Susa. Around 3300 BCE, it's quieter than Uruk, less stone, more thatch. But trade is brisk, and token pouches are still in fashion. A merchant sits by a reed mat, counting small clay cones into a pouch and muttering to himself, 12 for the sheep. No, wait, 14. Wait, was that with or without the spotted one? He groans and starts over. Enter the genius. Nobody knows their name. Maybe they were a frustrated clerk. Maybe a priest, tired of repeating themselves. But someone decided to skip the pouch entirely and just press the token shapes into a flat piece of clay, one for each item. Boom, the first receipt. You feel a little chill at that moment. Not because it's cold, it's never cold here, but because This is the spark, the conceptual leap. They didn't invent numbers yet, not in the abstract sense, but they were doing math, visually, physically, with imprints. One cone pressed equals one, sheep traded. And from there, it snowballs. Flat clay tablets become the standard. Impressions become symbols. Symbols become simplified, then repeated, then stylized. Before you know it, someone's carving a stylus out of a reed and thinking, maybe I can do a whole sentence with this. You glance down at your own tablet. It still feels primitive compared to what you're used to. No QR code, no barcode, no survey link for a chance to win. But it's honest. It's the seed from which written civilization grew. And as the old man beside you finishes his string game, he murmurs, they say writing came from the gods, but I think it came from people forgetting how many sheep they loaned out. You both laugh. The sky is deep purple now, and stars prick the horizon. It's time to head back, but your head is buzzing. You came to Mesopotamia to learn about receipts, but now you're questioning the origin of language, of memory, of truth itself. Receipts weren't just records, they were trust made solid, memory externalized, clay made clever. And it all started with a pouch full of pebbles and a problem that refused to stay in one person's head. You step away from the old man's firelight and wander deeper into the bustling city of Uruk, the very heart of ancient Mesopotamia. The streets are still alive with the scent of baked barley and the low murmur of traders closing deals. But you're drawn now to a quieter place, the scribes' school or Edba, tucked behind walls carved with curious cuneiform signs. This is where the real magic happens, where those simple clay impressions begin to morph into something more elaborate. Inside, the room smells faintly of wet clay and reed pens, with sunlight filtering through cracks in the mud brick walls. You find yourself standing beside a young apprentice, her fingers stained with ink as she presses a sharpened reed stylus into a soft clay tablet. Her brow is furrowed, and you can see the intense concentration. This isn't just handwriting practice. This is the birth of cuneiform script, the world's first writing system. You lean in closer. The symbols she carves look nothing like the tidy alphabet you're used to. Instead, they're wedge shaped marks, angular and repetitive. Each wedge represents a sound or an idea, and when combined, they tell stories, record transactions, or catalog laws. The script is dense and demanding, but mesmerizing in its precision. This, you realize, is how ancient Mesopotamians turned the simple concept of receipts into a fully fledged language. But why wedge shapes? Well, it's all about the tools and the medium. The reed stylus has a triangular tip, perfect for pressing into soft clay. Instead of scratching lines like a pen on paper, it presses flat wedges. Hence, cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. You picture it as a giant's old typewriter, with every wedge a key press. There's a quirky side to this too. Some scribes got so creative they started making tiny clay memos of everyday events. Imagine a tablet that reads, gave my wife 3 jars of beer, or received 5 sheep from my neighbor. Historians still argue whether these were official records or just early versions of gossip notes. You chuckle imagining ancient Mesopotamians passing these around like sleepy office memos. But scribes weren't just accounting clerks, they were the gatekeepers of power. Literacy was rare, a specialized skill passed down through intense training, often taking years to master. Being able to write meant wielding influence. Some scholars say that scribes were the original bureaucrats, controlling not just trade, but politics and religion, shaping history with each wedge pressed. Meanwhile, you're struck by the tactile nature of this system. Unlike your sleek smartphone screen, these tablets were heavy, warm in your hands, and needed to be baked or dried for permanence. Wet clay was flexible, great for quick notes or receipts, but if you wanted something to last, you had to put it in the kiln. You imagine the scribe carefully sliding tablets into ovens like ancient pottery, hoping they wouldn't crack or crumble. Here's a fun fact: some of these tablets were reused. You could wet and scrape the surface to erase old writing and start fresh, much like wiping a slate clean. It's like having a medieval dry erase board. You can almost hear the scribe grumbling, "Not another payment tablet. I just erased last month's." And then there's the fascinating variety of tablets. Some were tiny, like your palm sized receipt for a simple barley trade. Others were huge, covering the entire tablet surface with dense text. The largest tablets recorded epic stories, royal decrees, or complex legal codes. It's easy to forget, but writing back then wasn't just about business. It was a cultural treasure trove. Remember how we talked about tokens before? Well, even as writing grew complex, tokens and clay bully didn't disappear immediately. Historians still argue about the timeline, but many believe the two systems coexisted for centuries, each serving different purposes. Tokens handled physical goods, while tablets recorded abstract ideas and contracts. You imagine a merchant juggling both: his bully pouch for quick trade verification and a detailed tablet for legal agreements. It's a balancing act, like having a cash register and a legal pad. And if you think about it, that's the real genius of Mesopotamian innovation: a gradual, layered system evolving to meet practical needs while opening doors to abstract thought and culture. As you step out of the scribe school, dusk settles over the city, softening the edges of stone and clay. You glance down at your own tablet again, feeling a new respect for those wedge marks. They aren't just scratches, they are the voice of a civilization learning to speak through clay. And with that, you're reminded that what started as simple receipts, just a way to keep track of traded goods, became the foundation of writing itself. From wet clay to libraries filled with epic poems, all thanks to a few clever people who pressed wedges into mud and dared to tell a story. As the sun dips behind the ziggurats, you follow the trail of those early clay tablets from the scribe's school out into the city's bustling marketplace, where the real life consequences of these innovations play out. Imagine yourself weaving through the crowd, the aroma of roasted grains and fresh dates mingling with the chatter of merchants haggling over prices. Here, receipts are not just scribbles on a piece of clay, they are the very lifeblood of commerce, promising trust in a world without banks or digital ledgers. Picture a merchant with a pouch full of these little clay tablets, each a proof of a transaction, a receipt for a loan of grain, an exchange of livestock, or even a payment of taxes to the temple. These tiny tablets are heavy with importance. Without them, trade would rely solely on memory and trust, fragile as a reed boat on the Euphrates. You can almost hear the merchant muttering, "Better keep these safe, or I'll owe someone a lot of barley I didn't borrow." Here's a curious detail: some tablets weren't just about goods, they recorded deals about people too: contracts for apprenticeships, marriage arrangements, even adoption agreements. Historians still debate whether these early personal contracts were as binding as modern legal papers, or if they were more like polite suggestions written in mud. You smile, imagining a Mesopotamian shrugging and saying, "Well, I wrote it down. but no promises. And think about the incredible tactile ritual involved. To create a receipt, the scribe would take a small lump of wet clay, carefully form it into a flat tablet, then press in the details with a reed stylus. Once dry, the tablet was either left to air dry or fired in a kiln to make it permanent. Sometimes, for extra security, the tablet would be sealed inside a hollow clay envelope called a bulla. These bullae were stamped with unique cylinder seals. Think of them as ancient signatures or personal logos, pressed into soft clay, like a wax seal on an old letter. You might chuckle at the idea that the bullae often contained tokens representing goods, like tiny clay animals or grain shapes. So, a receipt might have both writing on the outside and physical proof inside. Double verification before double entry bookkeeping was even a twinkle in history's eye. The Mesopotamians were serious about keeping the deals airtight. Another fascinating point, these receipts were often made in triplicate. One copy stayed with the seller, one with the buyer, and a third went to the temple or palace archive as an official record. Imagine the layers of bureaucracy in a civilization thousands of years before we had paper or printers. It's like having three copies of your bank statement, but all of them made of mud. The role of the temple here is especially intriguing. Temples are not only religious centers, but also economic powerhouses, controlling vast tracts of land and production. The priests acted as accountants and auditors, using these clay receipts to track offerings, loans, and property. You might imagine a temple scribe poring over rows of tablets, whispering to himself, that's one too many goats listed here. Now, as you stroll, consider the scholarly debates swirling around this topic. Some historians argue that these clay receipts help standardize economic life and reduce fraud, essentially inventing the first legal system of commerce. Others think the system was more symbolic, intended to show intent rather than enforce contracts as we understand them today. You might find yourself pondering how much power these tiny clay tablets really held. On a lighter note, there's a quirky record from an ancient tablet listing a debt of beer, a considerable and serious form of currency back then. Imagine going to your bar tab keeper and settling your debt with a clay tablet that says, owes 10 jars of barley beer. It's less cash on the barrel head and more clay on the bar ledge. You may wonder how these early receipts influenced the economy. They laid the groundwork for more complex financial instruments, loans, interest, mortgages, all recorded on clay. This was a seed of economic civilization, sprouting from humble clay tablets, not from grand libraries or king's decrees. And just to keep your mind wandering, some tablets were actually receipts for labor. They recorded how many days a worker had toiled on a project, like building a canal or the city walls. This ties writing directly to the rhythms of daily life, not just the aristocracy's grand affairs. You imagine a tired worker holding his clay receipt at day's end, thinking, finally, proof I earned my dinner. As night falls over Uruk, you carry these thoughts with you, from simple clay lumps to an intricate system of trade, trust, and law. The humble receipt has come a long way, and all this history fits snugly in your hands, literally a tactile record of humanity's first steps toward organized civilization. As the dawn breaks over the Fertile Crescent, you find yourself wandering deeper into the realm of these early economic innovations. The clay receipts you've been following don't just mark individual transactions, they reveal an entire system of trust and regulation that held ancient Mesopotamian society together. Picture yourself standing beside a merchant's stall, watching as an eager buyer hands over goods, and the scribe promptly inscribes a fresh tablet. This moment is not just about exchange, but about the birth of accountability. You see, the Mesopotamians were masters of bureaucracy. Their clay receipts formed a web of checks and balances that connected farmers, traders, temples, and rulers. This was not a casual scribble but a carefully guarded record, sometimes even sealed with the personal cylinder seals of merchants or officials, marking authenticity like an ancient autograph. Imagine a seal rolling over a soft clay surface, the circular pattern pressed firmly as a symbol of trust and responsibility. What's truly fascinating here is how these receipts sometimes recorded more than just goods. They included measurements, weights, and even the names of witnesses, essentially creating a proto contract system. Historians still argue whether these documents were legally binding or simply acted as reminders in a society still deeply reliant on oral agreements. You can picture a debate between two ancient scribes, one insisting if it's on clay, it's law, and the other shrugging, but what if the clay breaks? Now think about the sensory world around the system, the feel of cool, wet clay pressed beneath the stylus, the sharp scent of drying mud in the sun, the muffled chatter of a busy marketplace surrounded by mud brick walls, baking under a hot Mesopotamian sun. The scribes were not just clerks, but artists, pressing wedge shaped impressions with practiced fingers that dance across tablets with delicate precision. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some receipts recorded not just mundane items like grain or sheep, but rare luxury goods like lapis lazuli beads or exotic spices. These items highlight the growing trade networks that stretched from Mesopotamia across Asia and even into the Indus Valley. You almost expect a tablet to mention one shipment of shimmering lapis lazuli, as blue as the sky, a poetic detail amidst dry numbers. Another intriguing aspect is how the clay receipts reflected social hierarchies. Temples and palaces issued receipts for tributes and taxes, while common folk received tablets confirming payments of debts or rations. The very texture of the tablet, its size and quality, sometimes indicated the importance of the transaction or the status of the parties involved. Imagine holding a tiny, carefully fired tablet from the royal archive next to a rougher, hastily inscribed one from a farmer's stall, each telling a story about power and place. The system also hints at early economic strategies. For example, some receipts recorded the lending of seeds or animals with an expected interest of a certain number of offspring or bushels of grain. This is the distant ancestor of loans and mortgages. You might smile, imagining a Mesopotamian scribe noting, owes 5 goats plus one for the trouble. A gentle reminder that even ancient creditors had a sense of humor. You may find it surprising that many receipts also reveal the administrative complexity behind food storage and distribution. Granaries and storehouses were managed with meticulous records to prevent spoilage and theft. This level of organization helped urban centers grow, feeding thousands with a supply chain managed through nothing but mud and reed styluses. It's like the original spreadsheet, slow, messy, but remarkably effective. Historians also debate how widespread literacy was at this time. While scribes were trained professionals, many common people likely never saw these clay tablets directly. Instead, the tablets might have been used more as official documents exchanged between elites, with ordinary people relying on trusted intermediaries to keep their interests safe. So, these receipts were as much about power as about commerce, a physical symbol of who could read, who could write, and who could rule. On a lighter note, you might chuckle at a tablet recording a debt of beer. Beer was a staple, more than a drink, a form of currency and nourishment. So, borrowing a jug or two was taken seriously, but with a good natured spirit. You can almost hear a weary farmer saying, "Pay me back next harvest, but save me a drink in the meantime." As the day stretches on, it becomes clear that these humble clay receipts were more than just economic tools. They were threads woven into the social fabric of ancient Mesopotamia. Each tablet was a small but essential piece of a vast, interconnected system of trade, trust, and governance, marking a milestone in human history where words took shape in clay to bring order to an ever expanding world. You settle into the shade of a date palm, the afternoon sun casting long shadows over the bustling streets of ancient Uruk. Around you, the air is thick with the mingled scents of fresh bread, drying clay, and livestock. As you look at the tablet being exchanged in the market, it's clear these little pieces of clay hold far more than numbers. They're a reflection of daily life, a chronicle of human relationships sealed in mud. Now, the fascinating thing about these receipts is how they weren't just for big merchants or temple officials. Ordinary people, farmers, artisans, even laborers had a stake in this system. Imagine a weaver receiving a clay tablet confirming the delivery of dyed wool, or a baker noting the receipt of grain for tomorrow's bread. These receipts were the tangible proof that work had been done and goods had changed hands, a reassurance in a world without modern banking or contracts. Historians still argue whether the average citizen understood the full legal weight of these clay tokens or if they serve more as personal reminders. Maybe it was like getting a handwritten "I owe you today," important, but sometimes more about trust than law. One particularly charming example comes from a receipt that details a very specific kind of transaction, the rental of a donkey. Yes, you heard that right. Donkeys were valuable beasts of burden, and the Mesopotamians were pragmatic about keeping track of who owed what for their use. The tablet not only notes the animal's rental period, but also includes a clause about who would care for the donkey and what compensation was expected if the animal got sick or injured. You can almost imagine the donkey's owner shaking his head, saying, "I swear this clay tablet has saved me from so many arguments." Speaking of animals, the role of livestock in these receipts opens another window into ancient economic life. Sheep and goats weren't just goods, they were currency, savings accounts, and even a form of social capital. Families' wealth was often measured by the size of their herds, and clay receipts frequently documented transfers of animals during weddings, inheritances, or business deals. There's a quirky note here. Some tablets recorded gifts of sheep to local deities, essentially a tax paid in livestock, which was a practice woven tightly into the religious fabric of society. As you ponder the significance of these clay receipts, it's worth noting their role in Mesopotamia's vast temple economy. Temples were not just places of worship, they were hubs of production, trade, and redistribution. The scribes who worked there recorded everything from grain shipments to labor services, creating an early version of public accounting. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a city's financial office, except all the records were kept on fragile clay, exposed to sun, rain, and curious fingers. Sometimes you'll find that the same receipt lists the names of temple officials responsible for overseeing these exchanges, revealing a bureaucratic hierarchy that rivals modern government departments. Now, here's a detail that might surprise you. Some tablets include corrections or amendments made directly on the clay, almost like editing a handwritten note. A scribe might scratch out a number, add a new line, or press in a note about a late payment. This hands on approach shows how fluid and adaptable the system was. Imagine the patience it took to carefully carve and recarve these details without cracking the tablet, a real test of a scribe's skill. You also find it intriguing that some of these receipts reveal early experiments with credit. Farmers who lacked enough seed for planting could borrow from temple stores, and the receipts documented these loans with expected repayment dates after harvest. This is one of the earliest forms of agricultural credit, a practice that helped stabilize food production cycles but also tied borrowers into complex social obligations. Historians debate how often these loans led to cycles of debt and whether they contributed to social inequalities. After all, not everyone could negotiate the terms of their clay contracts. The everyday nature of these receipts shines through even in the mundane details. Some list quantities of barley measured in silla, a standard unit equivalent to roughly a liter, while others note the quality or grade of the goods, whether the grain was prime harvest or a lesser batch. This attention to detail suggests a sophisticated market where not just quantity but quality mattered. It's a far cry from the broad brush of one size fits all trades. On a lighter note, there's a receipt that records a transaction involving a special kind of bread made for a festival. It describes the bread as sweet and soft, baked with dates and honey, a delightful treat that probably brought some joy to a market otherwise dominated by dry grains and livestock exchanges. It's these little glimpses of life's simple pleasures that make these ancient records so relatable. As twilight approaches, you reflect on the resilience of the system. Clay tablets may seem fragile to us, but their survival over millennia testifies to the durability of this early accounting method. These receipts were the backbone of a society that managed to grow cities, govern people, and develop trade long before paper or digital ledgers existed. So the next time you jot down a shopping list or tap a payment app, spare a thought for the Mesopotamian scribe patiently pressing wet clay with a stylus, crafting a record that was meant to last. And sometimes, just maybe, to help someone fall asleep with the comforting knowledge that their debts were noted, their goods secured, and their world orderly. You follow the dusty road leading away from Uruk's busy market, heading toward the quieter corners of the city where scribes spent long hours perfecting their craft. It's here, in the dim light of oil lamps, that the true artistry behind the clay receipts reveals itself, not just in their practical use, but in the very shapes and symbols carved into the tablets. At first glance, these tablets seem simple, neat columns of wedge shaped impressions called cuneiform, pressed into soft clay with a pointed reed stylus. But as you watch a scribe's practiced hand, it becomes clear that each symbol is part of a larger system, an ancient shorthand that communicated complex ideas with elegant economy. Imagine trying to carve an entire receipt onto a piece of clay smaller than a modern smartphone, and you get a sense of the skill involved. Historians still argue whether these early writing systems were primarily designed to keep economic records, or if the urge to write sprang from deeper human needs like storytelling or lawmaking. But in Mesopotamia, at least, the earliest evidence points strongly to record keeping. This makes sense when you consider the scale of trade and administration happening around you: temples distributing grain, merchants exchanging goods, officials tracking workers' wages. The receipts are the first formal step towards civilization's love affair with bureaucracy. The scribe's role was far more than just a clerk. They were educators, poets, and sometimes diplomats. Their training began in childhood, often in special schools called edubas, where they practiced the art of cuneiform on clay boards again and again, shaping their fingers to the delicate dance between precision and speed. You might imagine the dullness of such practice, but there's a soothing rhythm in the repetition, a kind of sleepy meditation. You wouldn't mind falling asleep to yourself. One quirky detail that often surprises people is that some clay tablets weren't just flat slabs, but were shaped into small envelopes or folded forms. These envelope tablets literally enclose smaller tablets inside, like ancient mail, carrying contracts or receipts sealed tight to prevent tampering. The outer clay envelope could be broken only by the recipient, adding a layer of security. It's a primitive but effective way to protect sensitive information, almost like the ancestor of a wax seal on a letter. Another fascinating feature of these tablets is their size variation. You find some as small as a fingernail, perfect for brief notes or receipts for a single transaction, while others are large and elaborate, sometimes with multiple columns, detailing extensive contracts or inventories. These larger tablets could even weigh several pounds, testament to the patience and endurance of the scribes who crafted them. Occasionally, you come across tablets with drawings or embellishments, simple line art depicting animals, tools, or gods related to the transaction. While the practical receipts rarely included such decoration, these touches hint at a culture that valued aesthetics even in mundane documents. Perhaps it was a way to imbue everyday life with a little bit of wonder. Speaking of gods, religion was deeply entwined with the scribe's work. Many receipts opened or closed with invocations to deities like Enlil or Nabu, the god of writing, seeking divine blessing on the deal or protection from fraud. It's a gentle reminder that business wasn't just about numbers, it was a sacred trust backed by spiritual authority. You can almost hear the scribe whispering a quiet prayer as they pressed each symbol, hoping the gods would keep their records true. Then there's the question of who actually read these receipts. Literacy was limited mostly to scribes and elite officials. For most people, these tablets were mysterious objects, more like magical talismans than everyday documents. This created an interesting dynamic where the power to write and thus control information was concentrated in a small class. Historians still debate how this affected social structures and whether the common folk ever fully grasped the implications of the clay contracts that shaped their lives. One more delightful tidbit: some tablets included nicknames or personal marks used by individuals who couldn't write their own names. Instead of a signature, they might press a unique symbol or seal into the clay, a precursor to modern signatures or stamps. It's a reminder that even 5,000 years ago, people wanted to personalize their agreements and leave a mark that was unmistakably theirs. All this scribal sophistication was a far cry from the chaotic world outside. As you glance back toward the lively streets, it's clear these tablets were a quiet revolution. a slow, steady push toward order in the messiness of human exchange. The clay receipts weren't just records, they were stories of trust, negotiation, and survival etched in mud, surviving thousands of years to whisper their secrets to us now. And if you ever worry about the tediousness of bureaucracy today, just remember those Mesopotamian scribes wielding their styluses over lumps of clay, carefully balancing precision, faith, and patience in the dim glow of their lamplit rooms. Somehow, it feels oddly comforting, like the ancient ancestors of every office worker who ever sighed at a spreadsheet. You find yourself drifting deeper into the labyrinth of ancient Mesopotamia's bureaucratic world, where clay tablets litter the desks and floors of scribes like fallen leaves. It's easy to imagine how these simple receipts could seem utterly dull to anyone but the most patient of record keepers. Yet here lies a quiet miracle. The receipts are not just dry lists of goods exchanged, but portals into the lives, economies, and social contracts of a civilization that shaped human history. Picture a small marketplace in the city of Lagash, not far from Uruk, where merchants bargain over barley, wool, and livestock. The air is thick with the mingling scents of fresh bread, pungent spices, and animals waiting to be traded. Somewhere, a scribe sits cross legged, hunched over a slab of damp clay, stylus in hand. Each wedge shaped mark he presses represents a number, a commodity, or a name, a code that makes sense only within this ancient system. This system, the cuneiform script, had evolved over centuries from pictographs into something impressively abstract and efficient. The transition wasn't overnight. Historians still argue whether this shift from picture writing to phonetic and numeric signs happened first for economic necessity or through the influence of storytelling and administration. The receipts, however, show us one clear truth. The driving force behind early writing was deeply practical. By now, you realize the receipts were much more than simple acknowledgments of a trade. They were legal documents, contracts that bound people to promises. Imagine a farmer lending grain to a neighbor before the harvest, or a temple allocating supplies to workers. These transactions needed to be recorded precisely to avoid disputes, and that's where the clay receipts came in, acting like early accountants and lawyers wrapped in one. A quirky aspect that often catches scholars' eyes is the presence of reversal tablets. These are little clay tablets inscribed with the word cancelled or void and pressed over the original receipt's text, literally erasing or invalidating a prior agreement. This makes you think of the ancient equivalent of Cutral Plazid or undo, except in clay and with a lot more permanence. The care with which these cancellations were made underscores the serious nature of record keeping and how much depended on these clay documents. Another fascinating angle is how receipts illuminate gender roles and economic participation in Mesopotamia. Although men dominated most transactions, some tablets reveal women involved in trade, owning property, and even lending money. One particularly charming tablet details a woman named Enin who lent barley to her sister's husband. Such glimpses challenge simplistic ideas about ancient gender norms and hint at a society with nuanced social dynamics. Historians still debate how widespread female economic agency was, but these receipts are invaluable clues. Beyond commerce, the receipts often included references to the gods and divine witnesses. A tablet might end with a phrase invoking Shamash, the god of justice, to guarantee fairness in the transaction. This blend of economy and religion meant that receipts carried spiritual weight, breaking a contract wasn't just a legal offense, but a moral and cosmic one. You can almost feel the heavy responsibility that came with inscribing these tablets, like signing a contract with the universe watching. The physical process of creating these receipts was tactile and methodical. Clay was gathered from riverbanks, then kneaded and rolled out into smooth, flat surfaces. The scribe's stylus, a sharpened reed, was dipped in water to avoid sticking and to achieve clean impressions once inscribed. The tablet could be dried in the sun or fired in a kiln for permanence. Each step required care. Too much haste, and the tablet would crack or the impressions would blur, ruining a vital record. Interestingly, some tablets included the personal seal impressions of traders or officials. These seals were tiny carved stones or pieces of bone pressed into the clay like a fingerprint, authenticating the document. Each seal was unique, often decorated with animals or mythological creatures. The presence of those seals turns the receipt into a piece of art and identity, showing how even mundane objects carried layers of meaning and pride. And then there's the fascinating question of how those receipts survived at all. Unlike papyrus or parchment, clay tablets are remarkably durable. When ancient cities were destroyed, whether by invasion, fire, or natural disaster, thousands of these tablets were baked hard by accident in the ensuing fires, preserving them for millennia. Without those infernos, most would have crumbled to dust. The irony is sweet. Destruction became preservation, and chaos immortalized the everyday. As you imagine the countless transactions recorded on these clay slabs, you begin to see them as the unsung heroes of human progress. They were the first steps toward bookkeeping, contract law, and the abstract recording of promises, the very foundations of complex societies, and all made from humble mud, pressed with patience and care, resting now beneath layers of earth, waiting for us to listen. So, next time you grumble about endless forms or digital receipts cluttering your inbox, spare a thought for the Mesopotamian scribes. Their slow, methodical work, marked by reed and clay, was a gentle and enduring testament to human ingenuity, a soft whisper from the past, helping you drift closer to sleep. Delving even further into the world of ancient Mesopotamian receipts, you begin to uncover how these clay tablets offer more than just economic data. They provide a window into the rhythms of daily life and the subtle interplay of power, trust, and social relations that underpinned the earliest urban societies. Consider a typical receipt tablet from the bustling city of Nipper, a spiritual and economic hub. The tablet records a transaction where a certain individual, perhaps a middleman or a temple official, acknowledges receiving a shipment of barley from a farmer. But this receipt is more than a simple acknowledgement. It spells out the quantity, the quality, the date, and even the conditions under which the grain was delivered. There might be notes on where the barley was stored, who was responsible for its safekeeping, and what penalties would apply if the grain spoiled. It reads like a contract, a blueprint for accountability written in clay. This level of detail highlights how the ancient Mesopotamians understood the importance of clear, enforceable agreements in maintaining social cohesion and economic stability. The scribes' meticulous work ensured that each party knew their rights and obligations, reducing the risk of disputes in a complex society where trade and labor spanned vast distances and involved multiple actors. Another layer of fascination lies in how these receipts reflect the administrative sophistication of ancient city states. Beyond the marketplace, temples and palaces were massive economic engines managing lands, workers, livestock, and resources. Receipts were essential for tracking the flow of goods and labor across these institutions. They served as proof for the distribution of rations, payment of wages, or allocation of raw materials for craftsmen. The sheer volume of tablets found in archaeological digs suggests a vast bureaucratic apparatus where records were key to governance. Interestingly, some tablets include annotations made after the initial inscription, corrections, additions, or even penalties levied for late payments or fraud. These post transaction notes demonstrate that record keeping was dynamic, not static, and that disputes could be documented alongside the original contract. It's an early example of transparency and accountability in business, showing how ancient peoples grappled with issues very familiar to us today. From a cultural perspective, the existence of these receipts reveals much about the values of Mesopotamian society. Honesty, trustworthiness, and adherence to agreements were deeply prized, often reinforced by the threat of divine punishment. The reliance on written proof suggests a community transitioning from oral promises to documented agreements, a hallmark of evolving legal consciousness. Receipts also reflect economic innovation. For example, some tablets reveal the use of promissory notes, agreements where goods or services were promised to be delivered later. This suggests a form of credit predating modern banking systems by millennia. You can almost hear the cautious negotiations, the verbal assurances backed by a clay tablet's silent promise. Delving deeper, you notice how the receipts reveal the scale of trade, local markets, intercity exchanges, and even long distance commerce along rivers and trade routes. These tokens weren't limited to just grain or livestock. They recorded everything from textiles and pottery to silver and precious stones. The variety is astounding, highlighting how interconnected and complex Mesopotamian economies were. But what about the lives behind these tablets? You can almost picture the merchants counting out silver pieces, the farmers watching their grain sacks carefully loaded onto carts, the temple officials double checking receipts before signing off. The tablets hold countless small stories, frozen moments of negotiation, trust, and sometimes tension. It's a bit like peeking through a window at a family dinner, only this family is a sprawling civilization. And here's a quirky thought to tuck into your mind as you drift further into calm. Some scholars speculate that ancient Mesopotamian merchants might have used certain clay tablets as business cards, carrying the seal impressions as a mark of identity and reputation. It's not the LinkedIn of today, but close enough to make you smile. All this layered history gently nudges you to appreciate the art of record keeping, not just as dry paperwork, but as a human endeavor full of personality, mistakes, hopes, and rituals. As the shadows lengthen in your imagination, you realize that these receipts were more than transactional. They were a lifeline connecting people, places, and promises across time. And as the quiet desert winds whisper outside your mental window, you feel your own eyelids growing heavier, the steady rhythm of ancient scribble hands shaping your dreams, leading you softly toward the gentle embrace of sleep. As the slow breeze of history carries you onward, you find yourself stepping into the world of Mesopotamian trade disputes and the role receipts played in resolving them. Imagine, if you will, a sunlit courtyard where two merchants stand face to face, each clutching their respective clay tablets, their receipts, which silently tell the story of goods exchanged, promises made, and debts owed. These humble tablets were the ultimate proof, the quiet authority in the noisy swirl of ancient market dealings. It's intriguing to consider how these clay receipts functioned as early legal documents. When a merchant claimed he hadn't been paid or received the right amount of barley or silver, the receipt served as the evidence. The scribes' neat cuneiform marks became witnesses, testifying in the absence of a crowd or a courtroom. This gave birth to a proto legal system where honesty was enforced by the authority of the written word, immortalized in clay. Historians still argue whether the strictness of these laws arose from religious morality or sheer economic necessity, but the effect was undeniable. Receipts could make or break reputations. Picture the process. A dispute might be brought before a local council or temple tribunal. The disputing parties would present their clay tablets, each stamped with their personal or family seals. These seals weren't just decorative, they acted like signatures do today, authenticating the document and linking it directly to the individual or business. It's a bit charming to think of these ancient signatures being little carved animals or symbols pressed into wet clay, a personal emblem passed down through generations. You might find it amusing that sometimes, when a tablet was lost or damaged, merchants resorted to oral agreements backed by the memory of the scribe or witnesses. Imagine that, a world where forgetting your password meant your entire business deal could unravel. This reliance on memory, alongside clay receipts, highlights the delicate balance between tangible records and human trust. It also sparks the scholarly debate about how much these records truly reduced disputes or if they simply shifted the battleground to who remembered best. Let's not forget the quirky and practical side of these transactions. Some tablets include clauses that read like ancient terms and conditions. For example, if the grain is spoiled upon delivery, a refund must be issued, or should the debtor fail to repay by the next full moon, interest will be charged. Sound familiar? It's basically the earliest version of your internet shopping refund policy, just a lot more tactile and less clickable. Beyond just commerce, these receipts also give us fascinating glimpses into daily life and social customs. For instance, some tablets record the loaning of livestock to temple workers or the payment of wages to laborers building irrigation canals. This broadens your mental picture of Mesopotamian society, where receipts weren't just about money, but also about managing resources, responsibilities, and relationships. Imagine the temple workers carefully checking their clay tablets after a long day in the heat, ensuring their pay was accounted for before heading home. And here's a small, fun detail to ponder as you settle deeper into the story. Certain receipts contain what might be the earliest thank you notes or polite phrases, a sign that even ancient merchants appreciated a little kindness in their business dealings. It's a gentle reminder that behind every transaction, ancient or modern, are real people trying to connect and cooperate. This weaving of commerce, law, and personal relations in clay tablets sets a tone that feels surprisingly modern despite the thousands of years that separate us. It's like listening to a whispered conversation from the past, the faint echo of voices bargaining, negotiating, and sometimes forgiving. As your thoughts drift in sync with this ancient marketplace rhythm, the weight of those clay tablets feels lighter, transformed into a soothing lullaby of human connection and the timeless need to keep promises. With every imagined touch of the cool clay, your mind grows quieter, your breath steadier, preparing to sink even deeper into restful slumber. you're still with me, gently tracing the outline of ancient Mesopotamian life, as we now turn to the surprising artistry hidden within those humble clay receipts. These small tablets were not just dry business records, they were little works of craft, combining practicality with an unexpected aesthetic charm. Picture yourself holding a freshly impressed clay tablet, the scribe's stylus, a tiny reed sharpened to a wedge, pressed delicate, wedge shaped impressions into the soft surface, each stroke purposeful yet elegant. There's something quietly soothing about the rhythm of this repetitive tapping, the same gentle, deliberate motions repeated thousands of times across the region's bustling cities. The scribes were trained artisans, and their script, cuneiform, is often described as one of the earliest writing systems. But it was also an art form with symbols that curl and wedge into visual poetry. Historians still debate whether scribes had individual styles or were trained into near identical precision. But either way, the beauty of their work can't be denied. Some receipts were purely functional, listing quantities of grain, silver, or livestock, but others were more elaborate. The best scribes sometimes added small symbols or decorative flourishes to the edges of the tablets, making them stand out. Imagine a merchant proudly showing off his beautifully penned receipt, like a modern day collector's limited edition. It's a detail that feels surprisingly human across millennia, a desire to take pride in one's work, even something as mundane as a receipt. Now, consider the tactile nature of these records. Unlike our ephemeral digital files, these clay tablets were solid, physical things you could hold, drop, or even accidentally crack underfoot. They were meant to last, baked in ovens to harden, or dried in the sun. Some survived thousands of years, buried beneath layers of earth, waiting patiently to whisper their stories to modern archaeologists. That durability made them invaluable. It's a bit like having a business card that doubles as a tiny sculpture, both a record and a keepsake. On a more whimsical note, there are odd examples of receipts that include amusing little clauses or peculiar add ons. For example, one receipt records a payment for beer. Ancient Mesopotamians loved their brew, and the tablet includes a note about how many jars were consumed during the transaction. It's like an ancient party receipt, reminding us that business could be social, relaxed, even fun. There's a gentle humor here that feels timeless. Even in ancient trade, people knew how to blend work and pleasure. The use of personal seals, which I mentioned earlier, also added an artistic flair. These seals were small carved stones or pieces of metal, each bearing a unique design, animals, gods, geometric patterns, and they left an imprint on the wet clay to confirm identity. These seals were like ancient logos or signatures, highly prized and often passed down through families. It's fascinating to think of a merchant pressing a tiny lion or eagle into a receipt, adding a flourish of personality. These seals were sometimes so intricately carved that they are considered miniature masterpieces of Mesopotamian art. As you feel your eyes growing heavier, you might reflect on how these receipts served as tiny capsules of daily life, merchants' ambitions, scribes' craftsmanship, the quiet joys of a job well done, and the subtle social dances encoded in clay. They were practical and beautiful, legal and personal, mundane and meaningful all at once. And here's an open question that lingers in the scholarly halls. Did these receipts influence later record keeping systems in distant lands, or were they a brilliant, isolated invention of the Fertile Crescent? The transmission of administrative technologies is still a puzzle that historians piece together with careful detective work. Perhaps as you drift off, you're helping that ancient mystery unfold in your dreams. You've traveled far today, from the dusty riverbanks of Sumer to the gentle tapping of a scribe's stylus. And as your thoughts settle into the quiet hum of the past, the story of the Mesopotamian receipt softens into a comforting rhythm, an echo of human ingenuity, patience, and the timeless need to keep track of what matters. As the gentle story of Mesopotamian receipts begins to draw to its close, you find yourself resting deeper into this ancient world, a place of soft clay, quiet scribes, and bustling markets long gone but still whispering secrets. Now, imagine the final piece of this story, how these humble clay tokens, those early receipts, helped shape the future, echoing through time in ways you might never have expected. After centuries of their use, the clay tablets became more than simple trade records. They evolved into the very foundation of bureaucratic order, giving rise to administrative systems that allowed complex societies to flourish. It's tempting to picture these early accountants as the unsung heroes of civilization, quietly keeping track of grain shipments and livestock trades, their work less glamorous than warriors or kings, but no less vital. They helped build the structure that supported everything from monumental temples to royal palaces. You might find it amusing to think that despite the passage of millennia, some things haven't changed. Modern receipts, invoices, and contracts are direct descendants of those ancient clay tablets. Of course, today's are digital, often blinking on screens instead of hardened in ovens. But the purpose remains to confirm agreements, to remember obligations, to bring order to exchanges. Historians still debate how exactly this transition from clay to papyrus to paper unfolded, and whether there were competing technologies lost to time. Yet the legacy of those first receipts is undeniable. There's also the quirky detail that in some ancient Mesopotamian cities, scribes were so highly valued they held prestigious roles, sometimes even wielding political influence. The ability to write and keep records was a form of power, a quietly potent skill that could shape the fate of kings and merchants alike. The notion that paperwork could be power feels oddly familiar, doesn't it? Perhaps the first bureaucrats were the original masters of office politics. Now, as you prepare to drift away, picture the quiet ritual of a scribe carefully placing a finished receipt into a clay envelope, a hollow ball of clay meant to protect the record inside. These envelopes sometimes had the same inscriptions pressed onto the surface as the tablet inside, a kind of ancient packaging label. Occasionally, these envelopes were broken open to verify their contents, adding a tactile suspense that's absent from today's digital confirmations. Imagine the soft crackle of clay breaking, the careful hands inside, revealing the truth held within, a moment frozen in time. And here's a final whisper for your thoughts. Some archaeologists suggest that these clay records might have even inspired early forms of storytelling or record keeping beyond commerce, like legal codes, myths, and poems carved into tablets, linking business to culture in ways that still puzzle scholars. Did those same scribes who tracked Bali also compose tales of gods and heroes? Historians continue to explore this rich overlap. As your breathing slows and your mind softens, feel the lingering calm of these ancient hands shaping clay, of a world where even something as simple as a receipt carried the weight of trust, artistry, and community. Now, As you settle in deeper, remember the quiet dignity of those first receipts, the small, enduring echoes of human connection that still touch us today. Let the slow, steady rhythm guide you gently into dreams, where the past and present meet in the softest clay of sleep.